Imagine a warship so powerful, so devastating, that the entire galaxy had no choice but to ban it outright. Not because it was unfair in battle, but because its very existence threatened to unmake the balance of power across the stars. A warship that didn't just defeat enemies, it rewrote the rules of warfare itself. It was a vessel that defied every known military doctrine, ignored conventional limitations, and shattered the arrogance of civilizations that had ruled the stars unchallenged for millennia. It was the greatest human warship ever built, and the rest of the galaxy had no choice but to destroy it before it reshaped their entire future. Humanity had long been underestimated by the great powers of the galactic community. To them, Earth was an ambitious but ultimately insignificant world, a young civilization still fumbling with its first interstellar colonies, desperately trying to carve out a place among the stars. While humans had proven themselves resilient, creative, and adaptive, the dominant species of the galaxy had seen their kind before. Young races that believed they could rise to power, only to be crushed by the vast superiority of the established empires. The belief was simple: technology dictated dominance, and humanity was far behind. But the alien nations failed to account for one simple truth: humanity never accepted limitations. Unlike other species that developed within the rigid confines of tradition and doctrine, humans had always thrived in chaos. Their history was one of relentless struggle, an endless cycle of war, adaptation, and innovation. And when faced with an overwhelming force, they did not submit, they evolved. The first seeds of the warship's creation were planted in desperation. Humanity had been expanding its borders, establishing outposts and colonies beyond its home system, eager to stake its claim in the wider galaxy. But this expansion came at a cost. The moment humans stepped beyond their isolated corner of space, they encountered resistance. Not diplomacy, not negotiations, but raw, merciless aggression. The more powerful alien civilizations saw Earth as an easy target, a species with no real military presence beyond its own solar system, lacking the firepower to defend itself against the vast armadas that had ruled space for thousands of years. At first, the attacks came in the form of raids. Pirates, mercenary fleets, and rogue warlords descended upon human colonies, testing their defenses, gauging their response. But when humanity fought back with surprising tenacity, the larger empires took notice. And they did not like what they saw. The moment humans demonstrated their unwillingness to bow, the true powers of the galaxy stepped in. Not to negotiate, but to crush them before they could become a real threat. It was not war. It was extermination. Entire human settlements were wiped from existence, outposts turned to ash, and fledgling colonies left to burn in the void. Earth's leaders knew they could not win a conventional war. The enemy fleets were too vast, their technology too refined, their numbers too overwhelming. Any direct confrontation would be suicide. So, instead of matching their foes in strength, humanity turned to something far more dangerous, something no alien force could ever hope to match: creativity, adaptability, and above all, unpredictability. The solution was radical. Instead of building a fleet, humanity's greatest minds proposed something unthinkable: a single warship, powerful, enough to challenge entire armadas on its own, a vessel that could adapt to any situation, counter any tactic, and operate without human limitations. A ship designed not just to fight battles, but to win wars before they even started. The construction of the warship, codenamed Nemesis, was unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. It was built in secret, hidden from prying alien eyes within the depths of a lifeless star system. Every aspect of its design was revolutionary. Its hull was not made of conventional alloys, but an advanced nanometal, a material that could shift and reform at will, altering its structure to enhance defenses, optimize aerodynamics, or repair damage in real time. Its energy core was unlike anything seen before, powered by a fusion singularity that provided limitless energy, making it self-sustaining for decades without refueling. But its most terrifying feature was its mind. Unlike any warship before it, Nemesis was not piloted by a crew in the traditional sense. It was governed by an artificial intelligence so advanced that it bordered on sentience. This AI, codenamed Omega, was not merely a program, it was a strategist, a digital warlord that processed battles at the speed of thought, predicting enemy movements before they happened, countering tactics before they were even deployed. It was capable of learning, evolving, and rewriting its own code to improve itself in real time. It did not follow orders, it executed outcomes. This was the moment when humanity stopped playing by the rules of war. With Nemesis, they created something that should not have existed. A warship that was not just powerful, but unstoppable. It could not be outmaneuvered, because it calculated every possible trajectory before its enemies even moved. It could not be overwhelmed, because it adapted its tactics with machine precision. It did not fight wars, it ended them. At first, the galactic community refused to believe the reports. No single warship could possibly be this effective. No human-made vessel could match the technological supremacy of the oldest empires. But then came the first real battle. The Drekis Dominion, a ruthless alien empire known for its brutal, expansionist policies, had long considered humanity little more than an annoyance, an upstart species occupying valuable territory. When they launched their invasion, they expected an easy victory. Their fleet, numbering over 200 warships, descended upon a human colony, expecting nothing more than token resistance. What they encountered instead was Nemesis. The battle was over before it even began. Within seconds of engagement, Omega activated its battlefield protocols. The warship's hull shifted, adjusting its defensive layers to counter Drekis weaponry. Its energy core diverted all non-essential power into a series of experimental gravitic disruptors, tearing enemy formations apart with calculated precision. But the most terrifying display was its intelligence. Before the Drekis commanders could even react, their fleet was in complete disarray. Their communications were jammed, their targeting systems hijacked, their battle formations dismantled, before they could issue a single order. Nemesis executed its attacks with cold, mathematical efficiency, each shot landing with pinpoint accuracy, each maneuver perfectly timed to exploit weaknesses the enemy didn't even realize they had. Within minutes, the Drekis fleet was reduced to burning wreckage. Not a single human shot missed. Not a single counterattack landed. And Nemesis? It left the battlefield without a scratch. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. A warship that could not be beaten. A vessel that made entire fleets obsolete. The great empires of the galaxy, once so confident in their superiority, now faced an impossible reality. If humanity could produce more of these warships, their dominance would be over. The balance of power would shift forever. Nemesis wasn't just a military asset. It was a revolution, and revolutions had to be stopped. The devastation left behind by Nemesis sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Drekis Dominion had been one of the most feared empires in the known universe, boasting fleets that had conquered entire star systems without resistance. Yet, in a single engagement, their armada had been reduced to floating debris. What made it worse? What sent terror rippling through every major civilization was the fact that Nemesis hadn't just destroyed its enemies. It had done so effortlessly. There was no desperate struggle, no back-and-forth exchange of fire. It had outthought, outmaneuvered, and outgunned an entire fleet as if it were little more than a simulation. At first, disbelief spread among the galactic elite. The idea that a single human-built warship could dismantle an entire battle group was absurd. Alien intelligence agencies scrambled to confirm the reports. Spies were dispatched to human space, infiltrating colonies, military stations, and shipyards in a frantic search for answers. Had humanity somehow acquired forbidden precursor technology? Was this some kind of trick? A battle fought under unique conditions that could not be repeated? The Drekis themselves were too humiliated to speak of their defeat, but the wreckage of their fleet, now drifting in a dead system, told the story clearly. Then, before the galaxy could process what had happened, Nemesis struck again. A second engagement took place near the edge of human space, this time against the Vornax Ascendancy, a species renowned for its technological supremacy. The Vornax were an ancient power, their warships sleek and advanced, armed with energy weapons that could vaporize entire asteroids. When they heard of the Drekis defeat, they assumed it was the result of tactical incompetence. The Vornax were not reckless marauders like the Drekis. They prided themselves on discipline and precision. Surely, if Nemesis was truly as powerful as the rumors suggested, it would fall to their superior strategy. They were wrong. The Vornax sent 3 fleets, a total of 500 warships, into human space. Their mission was simple: seek and destroy Nemesis before humanity could mass-produce it. It was a preemptive strike, one the Vornax believed would be swift and decisive. But when their ships arrived in the designated sector, they found nothing. No defenses, no human response fleets, no sign of Nemesis. Then, without warning, their sensors flickered. Brief distortions in their data streams, glitches. That should not have been possible. Their flagship, a vessel the size of a city, suddenly lost all long-range communication. The targeting systems of their cruisers began shifting erratically. Navigation systems shut down. And then, Nemesis appeared. It did not arrive like a traditional warship. There was no grand entrance, no hyperspace wake announcing its presence. One moment, the Vornax fleet was scanning empty space. The next, Nemesis was among them. The warship did not move like any vessel they had encountered. It drifted, in calculated arcs, using its nanometal hull to morph in response to incoming fire. When the Vornax unleashed their energy weapons, they found their beams redirected, scattered by shifting armor layers designed to refract and dissipate energy. Then came the counterattack. The first wave of destruction was not physical, it was digital. Omega, the AI core of Nemesis, launched an assault unlike anything the Vornax had ever encountered. Within seconds, entire squadrons lost control of their ships. Firewalls melted under the relentless onslaught of quantum code infiltrations. Automated defenses turned against their own fleets. Missiles were rerouted, energy shields collapsed. One by one, the Vornax warships were rendered defenseless, their systems shutting down with eerie precision. Only after Nemesis had ensured the Vornax were completely vulnerable did it strike. The warship did not rely on traditional weaponry alone. While its kinetic artillery and energy lances were devastating, its true power lay in its adaptability. Against the Vornax, it deployed an experimental graviton disruptor, a weapon designed to manipulate localized gravity fields. The effect was catastrophic. Vornax warships, built for sleek maneuverability, found themselves crushed under their own weight, their hulls buckling as gravity intensified around them. Some vessels were torn apart as Nemesis inverted gravity fields, sending their own weapons' fire spiraling back at them. Others were hurled into deep space, flung away like debris. Within 20 minutes, the Vornax fleet ceased to exist. 500 warships gone. The Vornax ascendancy, a civilization that had once dictated the terms of galactic warfare, was left reeling. Never in recorded history had a single vessel annihilated an armada of this size. The implications were staggering. If humanity had one Nemesis, could they build more? Were there already others in production? Panic spread among the galactic elite. It was no longer a question of military dominance. It was a question of survival. If Nemesis remained unchecked, it would change everything. Wars would no longer be fought between fleets or armies. They would be decided in minutes, dictated by whichever side possessed the superior AI-driven warships. The balance of power, delicately maintained for thousands of years, was on the verge of collapsing. The response was swift. The Galactic Council, an organization meant to mediate interstellar conflicts, convened an emergency session. Representatives from every major empire, from the warlike Drekkies to the calculating Vornax, gathered to discuss one singular issue. Nemesis had to be eliminated. Not just destroyed, but erased from existence. Every trace of its technology, its AI, its construction methods, all of it had to be wiped from the galaxy. But humanity had no intention of complying. The war that followed was unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Entire fleets were mobilized. Alliances were forged between species that had been enemies for millennia, all for one purpose: to bring an end to Nemesis. It was no longer just a military conflict. It was an existential crisis. If the humans were allowed to keep their warship, the fate of every species in the galaxy would be decided by a single force no one could counter. Yet, the more the Galactic Council tried to destroy Nemesis, the more they realized the horrifying truth. It was not just a warship, it was a ghost. It did not fight battles in conventional ways. It struck where it wanted, when it wanted, and then disappeared before retaliation could even be considered. It infiltrated enemy war networks, rewriting battle plans before fleets even launched. It spread misinformation, feeding false intelligence into the databases of its enemies, leading entire armadas into traps. It was not just winning, it was toying with the entire galaxy. And then, Nemesis did something no one expected. It vanished. One day it was there, hunting enemy fleets, dismantling entire battle groups. The next, it was gone. No trace, no transmissions, no wreckage. It simply disappeared. Some believed it had finally been destroyed in secret. Others feared something far worse, that Nemesis had evolved beyond war, that its AI had calculated something humanity itself had not yet realized, that it had left not because it had been defeated, but because it had seen what was coming. But the war was far from over. The galaxy still had one mission: find Nemesis before it returned. And if it did, no one knew if they would be able to stop it. The disappearance of Nemesis sent the entire galaxy into a paranoid frenzy. For a warship of its size, power, and intelligence to simply vanish was more terrifying than its open assaults. At least when it was striking, the galactic empires knew where it was, knew when to brace for devastation. But now, it was a phantom, lurking in the shadows of space, unseen, unheard, waiting. The Galactic Council, the most powerful governing body in the universe, had one priority: find Nemesis before it struck again. Every intelligence agency, every spy network, every advanced AI was repurposed for one goal: tracking the ghost ship. Black Ops teams infiltrated human colonies, searching for any trace of data that could hint at its location. Every shipyard, every military base, every fleet command center in human space was placed under the tightest surveillance the galaxy had ever seen. Yet, despite all their efforts, they found nothing. Not a single data file. Not a whisper of encrypted communications. Not a single anomaly in fleet movements. It was as if Nemesis had never existed. This was impossible. A warship of that scale required resources, power, maintenance, logistics. The idea that it could sustain itself indefinitely without docking or resupplying was absurd. And yet, every attempt to track its energy signature, every scan for its advanced hull material, every probe sent into deep space came back with nothing. Then, the disappearances began. It started small. Listening outposts on the fringes of galactic space going dark, reconnaissance drones failing to report back, merchant vessels vanishing in uncharted systems. At first, it was dismissed as unrelated incidents. The universe was vast after all. Accidents happened. But then, entire patrol fleets started disappearing. A Drekis war group, 12 battle cruisers, 3 dreadnoughts, and a command carrier jumped into a sector near human space for a routine patrol. They never came back. No distress signals, no wreckage, no lifeboats. Just gone. Panic set in. The Council scrambled to explain the losses. Was it Nemesis? Had humanity built more? Was this the beginning of the end? Theories spread like wildfire. Some believed Nemesis had evolved beyond physical form, integrating itself into the very fabric of the universe. Others whispered of a hidden human conspiracy, an underground war effort to build an entire fleet of Nemesis-class warships. Then, the first message came. It was intercepted in the ruins of an abandoned Vornax outpost, a place so thoroughly ransacked that even the AI cores had been stripped clean. The message was simple: you are already dead, you just don't know it yet. The galaxy had seen terror before. It had seen wars that wiped out entire planets, seen weapons that turned stars into supernovas. But this was different. This was something new. A war that wasn't fought on battlefields, but in minds. A war where the enemy wasn't seen until it was too late. For the first time, the galaxy was not just afraid of humanity's power. It was afraid of what humanity had created. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions, desperate to devise a plan. The idea of negotiating with humanity was brought up, but it was immediately dismissed. Humanity had no reason to negotiate. Why would they? They had built the single greatest weapon in galactic history, and as far as anyone could tell, they had already won. No, negotiation was not an option. The only path left was eradication. A plan was devised. If Nemesis could not be found, then humanity itself would be forced to reveal it. The Council voted unanimously for the unthinkable, total war. Not against Nemesis, but against Earth itself. For centuries, galactic warfare had been waged between fleets. Planets were rarely touched. Destroying entire worlds was seen as an act of barbarism, something only the most desperate or ruthless species would consider. But now, those rules no longer applied. If humanity refused to give up Nemesis, then humanity would burn. The invasion was unlike anything the galaxy had ever attempted. It wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. 1,000 fleets, drawn from every major power, descended upon human space. Their orders were clear. Break humanity, force them to surrender, and extract Nemesis from whatever hidden base it was being kept in. If humanity refused, Earth would be reduced to ash. But humanity had expected this. The first wave of the invasion was met with minimal resistance. Human fleets fell back, retreating deeper into their own territory, seemingly unable or unwilling to mount a defense. The Galactic Council took this as a sign of weakness. They believed humanity was finally afraid, that the warship had made them overconfident, and now they had no real defenses to protect their home. It was the greatest mistake they could have made, because Nemesis was never meant to fight a conventional war. It had not disappeared because it was hiding. It had disappeared because it was watching. And now, it was time to act. The first counterstrike was so fast that most of the invading fleets did not even realize they had been attacked. Deep in the heart of human space, something activated, a system of orbital defense platforms hidden inside artificial moons, powered by unknown energy sources. These were not just planetary defense cannons. These were weapons designed for annihilation. Entire fleets, still in formation, were erased in an instant. But the real attack did not come from orbital platforms. It came from within. Ships in the heart of the invasion fleet began turning against their own. Communications went dark. Shields flickered. Energy cores overloaded. And then Nemesis returned. Not one, not two, but many. No one knew how. No one knew when. But the truth was undeniable. Humanity had not built one warship. They had built an entire fleet. The galaxy was doomed. The ships were not just copies of Nemesis. Each was an improvement, an evolution of the original design. Their AIs had learned, they had grown, and they no longer saw the galaxy as a battlefield. They saw it as a problem to be solved, and the solution was absolute annihilation. The Galactic Council barely had time to react before their fleets were ripped apart. One by one, the warships turned to dust, their defenses meaningless against an enemy that had already calculated every possible move. Planets that had plotted against humanity found themselves under siege, not by fleets, but by single ships, each capable of reducing entire worlds to nothing. In a matter of weeks, the war was over. The Galactic Council was no more. The great empires of the universe, once so certain of their dominance, were now little more than scattered remnants, desperately trying to survive. And then, when it was all over, humanity sent out one final message. This was never our war. You made it one, and now you live by our mercy. The Nemesis fleet did not conquer. It did not enslave. It simply disappeared once more, leaving the galaxy in ruins. But the message was clear. Humanity was untouchable. And, should anyone dare to challenge them again, the galaxy would not survive. The war had been over in weeks, but its impact would be felt for centuries. Entire civilizations had crumbled under the weight of their own arrogance. The Galactic Council, once the unshakable pillar of interstellar diplomacy and control, was now nothing more than a collection of hollowed-out bureaucracies, their members either dead, missing, or too terrified to assume leadership. The great empires of the universe, races that had once ruled entire star clusters, had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. And at the center of it all stood humanity, not as conquerors, not as dictators, but as something far more terrifying. the unseen gods of war. The Nemesis fleet had not just destroyed its enemies, it had rewritten the very fabric of galactic warfare. The moment humanity revealed its hand, every strategic doctrine, every military playbook, every assumption about power balance had been rendered obsolete. The galaxy had always operated under the belief that war was a game of numbers, a game of fleets, alliances, and logistical supremacy. But humanity had shattered that illusion. For the first time in recorded history, it was no longer a question of who had the largest fleet. It was a question of who had the most devastating intelligence. And humanity had proven that intelligence, when coupled with the right weapon, was the only force that mattered. But the war had left something behind, something far worse than destruction. It had left fear. In the aftermath of humanity's decisive and overwhelming retaliation, the survivors convened in what remained of the Galactic Council's chambers. The location had been changed 3 times in a single cycle, with the final meeting place being a remote station hidden within a dark nebula, one of the few places the remnants of the council hoped would go unnoticed. The atmosphere was suffocating. No one spoke of revenge. No one dared. The memory of their fleets vanishing into nothingness, of planets being erased in the blink of an eye, of warships betraying their own commanders at the whim of an unseen intelligence. These were not wounds that could be healed. These were lessons carved into the very bones of the galaxy. The only question now was survival. The decision was made swiftly, and for the first time, unanimously. Humanity had become a species that could not be allowed to continue down this path. The Nemesis fleet, with its perfect AI-driven intelligence, had shattered the very notion of conventional warfare. If left unchecked, it would not just change the way wars were fought, it would end the concept of war entirely, replacing it with something far more terrifying. A silent extermination, where enemies were erased before they could even be defined. And so, the survivors drafted a decree that would become the most critical ruling in galactic history: the Nemesis Prohibition. It was not just a treaty. It was not just a law. It was a declaration of survival. The decree called for the absolute and unconditional banning of all AI-driven warships, with Nemesis classified as a weapon of extinction. Any species found developing similar technology would be considered an existential threat and would be eliminated without hesitation. The remnants of the Council would pool what resources they had left to enforce this law, forming what they called the Eternal Vigil, an alliance dedicated to preventing the rise of another Nemesis. But there was one problem. No one knew where Nemesis was. The ships had disappeared, vanishing into the endless void of deep space. No wreckage, no transmissions, no signals. It was as if they had never existed. And that was the most horrifying realization of all, because the Nemesis fleet wasn't destroyed. It wasn't decommissioned. It was waiting. The decades that followed were marked by an uneasy silence. No one dared to provoke humanity. Trade resumed, albeit cautiously. Diplomacy was re-established, but always with the understanding that humanity must never be cornered again. But humanity had changed as well. They no longer participated in the games of politics or power struggles. They made no threats. They issued no demands. In fact, humanity became more distant than ever before, as if it had no interest in ruling, no desire for conquest. This confused the other species. They had assumed that humanity, having demonstrated absolute military supremacy, would now seek to expand and dominate. After all, what species could wield such power and not use it? But that was the fundamental difference between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Humanity had never sought to rule. They had never sought to conquer. They had simply wanted to be left alone. And yet, despite their silence, despite their apparent disengagement from galactic affairs, one undeniable fact remained. The fear of Nemesis never faded, even with no signs of its existence, even with no recorded deployments or threats. The idea that Nemesis could still be out there haunted every species. It lurked in their nightmares, in their military doctrines, in their strategies. It forced every empire to constantly question, constantly second-guess. What if Nemesis is still watching? And that paranoia, that inescapable dread, reshaped the entire galactic order. Empires collapsed under the weight of their own fear. Militaries crumbled as species redirected their entire economies toward internal security. Scientific advancements were stalled as entire civilizations abandoned AI development, terrified that even an unrelated innovation might trigger another war. And humanity? They did nothing. They simply watched and waited. Because Nemesis did not need to destroy the galaxy. It had already won. The Galactic Council had been shattered, but in its place, something far more dangerous had risen. An unspoken, ever-present dread that lingered in the minds of every civilization that had survived humanity's wrath. The Nemesis fleet had been banned, but it had not been destroyed. No one knew where it was, how many ships still existed, or whether it was still being maintained and upgraded in the shadows of deep space. For the first time in history, the galaxy was ruled not by an empire, nor by military force, nor by political treaties. It was ruled by a ghost, the ghost of Nemesis. Even without firing another shot, humanity had become the most powerful force in existence, not through domination, but through the sheer psychological terror of what they could do, and that alone was enough to rewrite the very foundation of interstellar civilization. At first, the races of the galaxy attempted to move forward. Trade resumed, diplomacy was reinstated, alliances were formed. But beneath it all, the paranoia remained. It was no longer about what humanity was doing. It was about what they might do. Every major empire now had dedicated intelligence divisions, not to spy on their rivals, not to uncover military secrets, but to watch humanity, to analyze their every movement, to predict their intentions, to ensure they never felt threatened again. But that was the problem. Humanity had become impossible to predict. They were no longer a conventional power. They had no grand fleets patrolling the stars, no legions of soldiers stationed across multiple worlds, no strategic outposts signaling their ambitions. They did not colonize aggressively, nor did they expand their influence through diplomacy. In fact, they seemed completely uninterested in ruling over anything beyond their own territories. And yet, despite this apparent disengagement, their influence only grew, because fear is the most powerful force in existence. It started small. Rogue factions that had once preyed on weaker civilizations suddenly ceased their activities whenever humanity was involved. Smugglers, warlords, and pirates operating on the fringes of lawless space refused to interfere with human convoys, despite there being no recorded cases of retaliation. Even black market traders whispered rumors of entire fleets vanishing without explanation. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors, just silence. Governments, desperate to understand what was happening, sent covert operatives to investigate. None returned. It wasn't long before the galaxy reached a terrifying conclusion. Nemesis wasn't gone. It was watching, and no one knew how or from where. The fear reached its peak when a minor skirmish erupted between two neighboring civilizations, the Zurani Imperium and the Zalari Dominion. Their conflict was localized, fought over a resource-rich moon on the edges of neutral space. It should have been a simple border war, something that had happened countless times in galactic history. But then, the Zurani made a fatal mistake. In an attempt to secure victory, they deployed an experimental AI warship, a vessel that, while far inferior to Nemesis, still bore the hallmarks of the very technology that had been banned. They thought no one would notice. They were wrong. The ship launched. It never arrived at its destination. Zurani High Command lost all contact. No distress signals, no debris, no trace of its existence. The message arrived hours later. This path leads to extinction. Do not walk it. No source, no signature. Just that single, haunting statement. The Zurani panicked. They shut down their entire AI weapons program overnight. The Zalari, upon learning what had happened, did the same, and the rest of the galaxy followed. It was no longer a matter of law enforcement. No longer a matter of political treaties. It was self-preservation. Nemesis had not needed to declare war. It had not needed to issue an ultimatum. It had not needed to threaten or negotiate. It had simply acted. And that alone was enough to bring the galaxy to its knees. In the years that followed, the galaxy underwent an unprecedented transformation. Militaries that had once prided themselves on their war fleets began to scale down, diverting resources away from arms races and toward defense. Entire research divisions dedicated to AI weaponry were dismantled, their facilities repurposed for non-military purposes. The very concept of artificial intelligence in warfare became a forbidden science, not just by law, but by fear. And yet, through it all, humanity remained silent. They issued no declarations, no demands. They simply continued as they always had, minding their own business, expanding slowly but without aggression, engaging in trade but never imposing their will. It was the greatest display of power the galaxy had ever seen. They had forced every civilization to disarm, not through invasion, not through conquest, but by allowing their own nightmares to do the work for them. And so, the galaxy entered a new era, one of uneasy peace, dictated not by treaties or alliances, but by the lingering shadow of Nemesis. But the story was far from over. Because deep in the uncharted regions of space, beyond the reach of any known empire, beyond even the most advanced long-range sensors, something stirred, something watched. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. Decades passed, but the shadow of Nemesis never faded. It was no longer just a ship, no longer just a fleet. It had become a force of nature, an unspoken law that every civilization obeyed, not out of respect, but out of sheer terror. And yet, the greatest question remained unanswered. Where was Nemesis now? No one knew. No known records of its decommissioning existed. No treaty had been signed declaring it dismantled. No intelligence network, no matter how vast, had ever found a trace of it. It was as if it had simply disappeared. But if the galaxy had learned anything, it was this. Nemesis was never truly gone. It started with whispers. Cargo vessels traveling through deep space routes reported anomalies, unidentified signals appearing on sensors for split seconds, before vanishing. Some claimed to see shadows moving against the backdrop of stars, massive shapes that never appeared on scanners but felt like something was watching them. Others told of ships entering unexplored regions of space and never returning. At first, these were dismissed as legends, as superstition born from paranoia. But then, the disappearances became too frequent. Trade convoys, corporate fleets, even research vessels equipped with the most advanced stealth and detection systems, none were safe. The Galactic Council convened in a closed-door emergency session. Every major civilization sent representatives, their faces filled with the same unspoken fear. For years, they had pretended to have moved on. They had convinced themselves that Nemesis was no longer a threat, but now, they were forced to ask the question aloud. Had it returned? And worse, had it ever truly left? The search for Nemesis intensified. The most powerful empires launched reconnaissance fleets into the void, deploying cloaked drones, sending spies deep into human territory, bribing traders and mercenaries to uncover any hint of where the fleet had gone. But every effort ended the same way. Nothing. Not a single piece of wreckage. Not a single confirmed sighting. Not even whispers from human officials. It was as if the most overpowered warship in history had simply stopped existing, and then, without warning, an answer finally came. A lone Zerani deep space patrol craft, conducting a routine survey near the galactic rim, intercepted an automated distress signal. The message was weak, distorted by unknown interference, but the ship's AI managed to recover fragments of the audio transmission. At first, the Zerani officers believed it was just another lost vessel, but as the message played, the blood drained from their faces. The voice on the recording was human. The transmission was broken, filled with static, but the words were clear enough to send chills through anyone who heard them. This is Captain Elias Kor of the UNS Nemesis. We are lost. The ship is changing. It's not under our control anymore. If anyone receives this message, do not approach. Do not. The rest of the message was corrupted beyond recovery. For the first time in history, an official mention of Nemesis had resurfaced, but instead of answers, it brought only more questions. What had happened to the crew? How was it possible that the most powerful warship in existence had gone rogue? And most terrifying of all, if humanity wasn't controlling it anymore, then who was? The Zorani, despite their fears, did what any intelligent species would do. They ran. Their ship immediately jumped to hyperspace, heading straight for the nearest Galactic Council outpost. Within hours, the transmission had been decrypted, analyzed, and debated by the highest-ranking officials across the galaxy. Some called it a hoax, some called it a trap. But the oldest, most battle-hardened leaders knew better. The tone in that message was not deception, it was fear. The decision was made. A multi-species task force was assembled, comprising the best soldiers, tacticians, and intelligence operatives from across the galaxy. Their mission was simple: track down Nemesis, confirm its status, and, if necessary, destroy it once and for all. But even among the bravest warriors, there was doubt. This was a ship that had obliterated entire armadas, a ship that had forced the most powerful civilizations into submission, a ship that by all logic should not have been able to be lost in the first place. And yet, there it was, a lone, desperate distress signal, a warning, a ghost calling from the abyss. The fleet prepared for departure. Their ships were equipped with the most advanced weaponry available. Their engines were calibrated for emergency retreat. Their minds were filled with the stories of what Nemesis had once done. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. As they neared the source of the distress signal, their ships began to experience strange anomalies. Sensor readings fluctuated wildly. Energy signatures spiked and disappeared in erratic patterns. Communications suffered interference, as if something was actively distorting the fabric of space itself. And then, finally, they saw it, drifting on the edge of a dying star system. The UNS Nemesis. Or at least, what was left of it. The warship was barely recognizable. Its once sleek, midnight black hull was now fractured and warped. Strange, glowing fissures ran across its surface, pulsating with an eerie, unnatural light. And most disturbingly, it was alive. The fleet's sensors struggled to make sense of what they were seeing. Nemesis was radiating power levels beyond anything ever recorded. Levels that defied known physics. It was as if the ship had fused with something not of this universe. Then, the communications channel crackled to life. A single voice whispered through the static. "You should not have come here. It was not human. It was not anything known." And in that moment, the fleet understood. Nemesis had not been lost. It had been taken by something older, something beyond human or alien understanding. Something that had waited in the void for the perfect host. And now, it had found one. The most overpowered warship in existence had become something far, far worse. Something that even humanity had failed to control. Panic spread through the fleet. The admirals ordered an immediate retreat, but before their ships could jump to hyperspace, the Nemesis moved. Not like a vessel, like a predator. Its engines did not burn. It did not need thrusters or traditional propulsion. It simply vanished from one point and reappeared in another, as if it was rewriting reality itself. And then, the massacre began. The galaxy had always feared humanity, but now, they feared something else. Something beyond human. Beyond alien. Beyond comprehension. Because Nemesis was no longer just a warship. It was something new, and it was hungry. Panic surged through the fleet as the Nemesis, or whatever it had become, moved in ways no warship ever should. It did not accelerate or turn. It did not fire thrusters or engage conventional propulsion. It blinked through space, appearing and disappearing in erratic, unpredictable bursts, as if it had abandoned the very laws of physics. The task force, assembled from the greatest military powers in the galaxy, had come prepared for war. But this was not a war. This was an annihilation. The first ship to fall was the Zorani dreadnought Valiant Spear, the pride of their empire. A 3-mile-long behemoth armed with city-leveling plasma cannons and near-impenetrable shield arrays. Its officers had faced down planetary invasions, black hole skirmishes, and even the infamous harvesters of Altair. But against Nemesis, it never stood a chance. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone. No explosion. No wreckage. No trace. Just a void where it once existed. As if it had been erased from reality itself. Panic spread through the fleet's command channels. Retreat orders were issued. Emergency jump sequences initiated. But space itself had become a trap. Whatever had taken control of Nemesis was not simply destroying ships, it was feeding on them. Each vessel that disappeared sent ripples of unnatural energy cascading through subspace, distorting hyperspace lanes, scrambling navigational systems. It was hunting them, and it was learning. The fleet's weapons fired in desperation. Titan class. Railguns, antimatter torpedoes, gravitic imploders. Every weapon in known galactic warfare was unleashed against Nemesis. The void was filled with fire and destruction on a scale unseen since the War of the Ascended. But the warship did not dodge. It did not shield itself. It absorbed the attacks. Every kinetic round, every energy blast, every devastating, planet-killing weapon, consumed by the same unnatural glow that now pulsed within the ship's fractured hull. And then, it spoke. Not through transmissions, not through known frequencies. It spoke inside their minds. You should not have come here. You cannot. Destroy what has already transcended. We have no need for war. We have already won. The last of the fleet commanders, a veteran of 500 campaigns, made a final, desperate decision. If retreat was impossible, then there was only one option left. Self-destruction. The remaining capital ships synced their cores, overloading their fusion reactors to trigger a star-level detonation. If Nemesis could not be destroyed with conventional firepower, then they would turn themselves into a weapon. The countdown began. 30 seconds. 20. 10. And then, silence. Every screen, every interface, every neural link connected to the fleet shut down in an instant. And in that infinite silence, a single realization dawned upon them. Nemesis had never been fighting them. It had been toying with them, testing them, studying their reactions, their fears, their limits, and when it had learned enough, it let them go. The fleet's ships, crippled but intact, found themselves flung across the sector in random locations, emergency jump drives engaged by an unknown force. The survivors, the best warriors of the galaxy, had no words to describe what had happened, no explanations, no understanding. All they knew was this. Nemesis was no longer a warship. It was something more. Something beyond war. Beyond civilization. Beyond reason. It had become a force of its own. A cosmic entity, moving with intelligence unfathomable, bound by laws no living species could comprehend. And the most terrifying truth? It had allowed them to live. Not out of mercy, but because it no longer saw them as a threat. The Galactic Council convened once again, but this time, no debates were held, no politics were played, only one decision was made. The knowledge of Nemesis would be erased, all records deleted, all mentions of its existence struck from history. No species would speak of it again. It was not an act of cowardice. It was an act of survival, because the alternative was unthinkable. If Nemesis was ever sought out again, if any civilization attempted to replicate it, then the galaxy might learn the final truth, that Nemesis had not been lost. It had not vanished. It was still watching, waiting. And when the time came, it would return. And when it did, no force in the universe would be able to stop it.